So I introduce to you Stephan Heilen, who is going to talk about the concept of tacit knowing, its relevance to the practice and study of astrology. Stephan Heilen teaches at the University of Osnabrück. His work is well known and has encompassed both the Hellenistic and the Greek astrological practices, as well as the early modern practices. Among his books are Adriani Genitura, it's a very complex book on astrological practices in the Greek period, and more recently, Conjunction Prognostic, which is a first volume of a larger set on prognostications of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions and their relationship to their time. So I'll handle the presentation to Stephan, please.
Thank you very much, Luis, for organizing this erudite exchange, and especially for being so kind to invite me as a speaker. One moment, please. Okay. I'm afraid I have to admit that my slides are the least adorned in this workshop, but I'm trying to put the essential data on the slide, which will develop from line to line. My topic today is new work in progress, unrelated to my previous research that I've been doing over many years. Therefore, I kindly ask for your patience if I raise questions to which I have only provisional answers. I wish to direct your attention to Michael Polanyi's concept of tacit knowing and its relevance to the practice and study of pre-modern astrology. One moment, please. Oh. Okay. Polanyi was already an authority in physical chemistry when he turned his attention to philosophical questions arising from his experience in the natural sciences. His booklet, The Tacit Dimension, contains a stimulating inquiry which is still considered to be, quote, far-reaching and foundational, end of quote, as Harvard professor and Nobel Prize winner Amartya Sen writes in his foreword to the re-edition of 2009. As a matter of fact, the discipline of knowledge management is largely based on Polanyi's work. Polanyi's basic insight is that, quote, we can know more than we can tell, end of quote. Therefore, he speaks of tacit knowing. One of his most convincing examples is from physiognomy. Quote, we know a person's face and can recognize it among a million. Yet we usually cannot tell how we recognize a face we know. So most of this knowledge cannot be put into words, end of quote. Another example is how native speakers know their language. They pick it up at a young age, almost entirely unaware of the formal grammar. Yet they are able to employ their tacit knowledge of the rules of grammar. Other examples pertain to more practical forms of tacit knowing, such as keeping balance while riding a bicycle or playing a piano score by heart without remembering those hundreds of single notes. And I can confirm from personal experience that Polanyi is right, saying that if the piano player focuses too much on such detail, he tends to lose the acquired, interiorized, and subconscious skills. In general, then, tacit or implicit knowing how to do something, as opposed to formal, codified, or explicit knowledge, is a skill either of a more intellectual or of a more practical kind that is based on interiorized practice and difficult to express in words or writing. Due to time constraints, I leave it to the interested readers to explore the details of Polanyi's fully developed analytical model in chapter 1 of his booklet. Now, Polanyi never mentions astrology, and his theory is, to the best of my knowledge, unknown both to practitioners and historians of astrology. Nevertheless, his theory is particularly relevant to astrological practice. I owe this insight to Philipp Balziger, a professor of philosophy who opened my eyes for this after we both attended a lecture by the aforementioned Dr. Jeffrey Cornelius. Doreen Greenbaum mentioned Cornelius in her presentation today. So Balziger and I both attended, and also Doreen Greenbaum was there. We all attended a lecture by Jeffrey Cornelius, who is one of the most prominent and influential British experts in astrology, who works as a consultant, teacher, and historical researcher. Cornelius gave that lecture in 2016 at a conference on horoscopy across civilizations, whose proceedings I am currently editing. In his contribution to this volume, Cornelius follows Balziger's suggestion and embraces Polanyi's concept as a key to better understanding his own astrological practice. I shall quote from Cornelius's reflection on the astrologer's knowing of symbol. Quote, "For example, what does Mars mean? What is the true nature of the sun in Cancer? A large part of such knowing resides in a combination of a general sense of meaning together with a disordered assemblage of memories and unique personal associations. The part that is seized upon, the focus of our conscious attention, is the denotation of the symbol in the unique circumstance. But in an important sense, this is the lesser part of symbolic knowledge. There is a vast pool of tacit knowing, sensing, and feeling, out of which only one or two factors will be drawn into conscious association. Other factors lie just below the surface of thought, ready to hand. Others still lie at descending depths, less and less obvious to us, unless drawn up in a singular and essentially unpredictable circumstance." End of quote. While Jeffrey Cornelius is convinced that such tacit knowing plays an important role in his own astrological practice, and presumably also in that of other contemporary astrologers, we may wonder whether tacit knowing was also relevant to the astrological practice of more or less remote historical epochs. At first sight, one might feel inclined to answer no, because the various schools of modern astrology have more or less participated in the general trend of Western philosophy since the late 19th century towards subjectivity by absorbing elements of Freud's psychoanalysis, the Jungian archetypes, etc. Pre-modern astrologers instead, especially those of the ancient Greco-Roman world and the European Renaissance, used to present their art as a technique of objective processing of empirically generated yet incomplete data and tenets. Nevertheless, tacit knowing must have played an important role in their practice too, even if they were philosophically unprepared to conceptualize it as such. I insist on this point because tacit knowing has, according to Polanyi, a sweeping presence in the world, and particularly because it seems unthinkable that pre-modern astrologers consciously mastered the virtually infinite amount of formalized and explicit detail contained in their manuals. Instead, it is likely that each of those relatively few central astrological symbols, especially the 7 planets and the 12 zodiac signs, evoked complex symbolic meanings that those astrologers had previously interiorized and would only partly be able to verbalize. Now, if this approach is valid, we ought to recognize one central problem, namely that our research on pre-modern astrology is almost entirely based on texts, that is, on products of formalized, explicit knowledge. This makes us prone to assume that the formation of pre-modern astrologers was similarly centered on texts, and that their practice consisted of conscious selection, combination, and application of tenets contained therein. But it may be worth exploring the role of personal master-apprentice relationships, because Polanyi emphasizes that we appear to be able to teach certain things, that we cannot tell through practical exercises. Okay, he emphasizes, let me repeat this, that we appear to be able to teach certain things that we cannot tell through practical exercises. But, quote, we can do so only by relying on the pupils' intelligent cooperation for catching the meaning of the demonstration, end of quote. Polanyi's practical exercises would, in astrology, first of all be joint examinations of sample nativities in which the master, showing the enactment of interpretation in a demonstration, provides the student with a paradigm and allows his intelligently assenting student to imbibe and interiorize astrological knowledge. According to Jeffrey Cornelius, Polanyi's analysis of knowledge transfer in master-apprentice relationships, quote, may be a pointer to the enthusiasm of the Renaissance astrologers for the written-up casebook demonstration of relatively simple judgments asserted by Girolamo Cardano as a new way of teaching astrology, augmenting the dogmatic and often contradictory rules of canonical texts, end of quote. Cornelius exemplifies this with a second contribution to the aforementioned volume of the conference proceedings, in which he argues that Cardano's brief judgment of Angelo Poliziano's nativity was misunderstood by Anthony Grafton and inappropriately criticized as an arbitrary and incoherent interpretation lacking demonstrable criteria for its choices. In sum, it may be worth rethinking our picture of the education and practice of pre-modern, especially early modern astrologers in the light of Polanyi's theory, with special attention to documented processes of teaching and learning, to the use and importance of sample horoscopes, and to insights that may be gleaned from autobiographies of early modern astrologers. My emphasis on the early modern period is not due to a lesser interest in more remote historical periods, but by the simple fact that the extant documentary evidence is much richer from the Italian Renaissance onwards. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Stephan. Again, a lot of material to discuss, and an important contribution to the way we approach the history of astrology.